Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Throughout the vast expanse of the galactic community, spanning thousands of civilizations across countless worlds, one truth had emerged with terrible clarity. You only go to war with humans once. Not because they were undefeatable, many species possessed greater technology or numbers, but because humans alone responded to aggression with such absolute retribution that no attacker survived to attempt a second conflict. Izir knew this truth better than most. He lived with it every day in his cold cell, the last representative of a once proud species who had learned this lesson too late. The light purple hue of Izar's skin had dulled during his years of imprisonment, making the delicate scale-like texture appear ashen under the harsh artificial lighting. His tall, slender frame, once bearing the proud posture of a Mogarian ambassador, now hunched slightly as he paced the confines of his brick-stone cell. Two large eyes, their natural violet luminescence faded to a dull lavender, surveyed his sparse surroundings for the 1000th time. His 5-fingered hands, nearly identical to a human's save for the slight webbing between each digit, absently traced the walls as he walked. The cell was small, barely 6 paces across, with nothing but a basic sleeping platform and sanitation unit. It was, Izir often thought, a fitting tomb for the last meaningful representative of the Mogarian civilization. The monotony of his confinement had become a reliable constant. Wake, go out to exercise, eat the bland nutrition provided, and then return to his cell and watch the hours pass, remembering a life that no longer existed. The tedium had become so absolute that when the usual sounds of activity echoed down the corridor, Izir's antennae, two short, sensitive appendages protruding from his forehead, perked up involuntarily. Guards' voices, the distinctive sound of restraints, and the unmistakable cadence of a new prisoner being processed broke through the silence of the high-security wing. Izir pressed himself against the wall that separated his cell from the adjacent one. Empty these past 3 cycles since the Dramic who occupied it had expired from natural causes. The sounds grew louder until they stopped directly outside. Orders were barked, locks disengaged, and then the distinctive whoosh of the neighboring cell door opening and closing. "Welcome to your new home," one of the guards said with unmistakable mockery, before the sound of retreating footsteps indicated their departure. Silence fell once more, but Izir could sense the presence on the other side of the wall. A new inmate, a new voice. After 3 cycles of nothing but guards and his own thoughts, the possibility of conversation sent an electric current of anticipation through his body. Izir reached up to the base of his skull, feeling for the small bump where his neural implant, a universal translator required for all council ambassadors, was embedded. He pressed it gently, ensuring it was still functional. It had been so long since he'd spoken to anyone who wasn't a guard that he worried the device might have atrophied from disuse. "It still works," he muttered to himself, hearing the familiar synthetic undertone as the implant converted his native Morgarian speech patterns into the standard galactic tongue. With that assurance, he called out to his new neighbor. "What are you in for?" The question echoed in the empty space, sounding more abrupt than he intended. For several moments, there was no response, and Izir wondered if perhaps the new prisoner didn't have a translator, or worse, was one of the non-verbal species. But then a voice replied, terse and flat. "Shot a galactic judge. The worst part was that the 4-eyed Gotharian survived." Izir felt his breath catch. The blunt admission of attempted murder, stated without remorse or justification, momentarily shocked him. Not because he was morally outraged, he had participated in far worse, but because of the straightforwardness. In his experience, most beings attempted to justify their crimes, to explain how circumstances had forced their hand. The prisoner had simply stated the facts. A smile, rare and genuine, spread across Izir's face. "I've felt like shooting a galactic judge a few times myself." he replied, a hint of his old diplomatic charm returning in his voice.
"Especially during my time as ambassador. Those sanctimonious Gotharians with their multiple eyes always watching, always judging."
He settled himself more comfortably against the wall, feeling a strange camaraderie with the unseen prisoner.
"I was ambassador for my species at the Galactic Council. Before most of us went extinct, that is."
As the words left his mouth, Izir realized he had begun telling his story without even asking for the name or species of his new neighbor. In his former life, as a diplomat, such an oversight would have been unthinkable. But prison had changed him. Or perhaps it had simply stripped away the veneer of civilization, revealing what had always lurked beneath, a being concerned primarily with his own narrative.
"I don't even know what you are,"
Izir said with a short, harsh laugh.
"Forgive my manners. They deteriorate after years in isolation."
But rather than offer his own identity in return, the mysterious prisoner remained silent on the matter. Izir found himself both irritated and intrigued by this. He decided to accept the mystery, convincing himself he would simply wait for the other prisoner to ask first. An old negotiating tactic. Let the other party make the first real overture. Surprisingly, the question never came. Instead, after a thoughtful pause, the voice simply asked, "What about you? What are you in for?" The question lingered. In that moment, Izir felt a strange comfort wash over him. For decades, he had been guarded, defensive, maintaining the official position that his species had been wrongfully accused, that the evidence against them had been exaggerated. But now, imprisoned for life, what purpose did such pretenses serve? There was a liberation in having nothing left to lose.
"Would you like the official record?"
Izir asked.
"Or the truth?"
"The truth," came the immediate reply. "We have time for nothing else in here." Izir closed his eyes, remembering. For the first time since his capture and trial, he felt the urge to tell the uncensored version of events. Not the sanitized account he had given the council, nor the defiant justifications he had offered during his sentencing. The real story, with all its arrogance and miscalculation.
"Very well,"
he said, settling into a more comfortable position against the wall.
"I am here because my species committed what the council termed unprovoked genocide against a previous unknown intelligent species. The survivors of that species called themselves humans."
He paused, listening for a reaction, but his neighbor remained silent, waiting.
"It began with a meeting,"
Izir continued.
"The king of my world summoned me from my council duties. This was unusual, typically. He communicated via secure channels rather than requesting my physical presence. But the matter, he said, was too sensitive for standard protocols."
Izir's antennae flattened against his head as he recalled the fateful day that had set everything in motion.
"When I arrived, he showed me the surveillance data. Our long-range probes had discovered a species in a neighboring system, primitive by our standards but advancing quickly, too quickly, and too close for comfort."
He could still see the king's face, the concern in his eyes as he laid out the situation.
"The king wanted my opinion on the best way to hide them from the council while we eliminated the potential threat they posed. He asked me, as someone familiar with council politics, how we might circumvent the non-interference statutes."
Izir felt the familiar weight of his choices settling on him once more.
I should have objected. I should have reminded him of our sworn duties as council members. Instead, I looked at the data, at this upstart species that had already moved from primitive combustion to rudimentary atomic technology in mere centuries, and I agreed with him.
His voice dropped to little more than a whisper.
"Who needs more competition in our sector?"
These had been his exact words, 5 simple words that had doomed his entire civilization.
That, Izir concluded, is what I am in for. The true version, not the official one, and the story only gets worse from there.
Silence hung between the cells after Izir's confession. He wondered if his mysterious neighbor regretted asking, now that the conversation had turned into genocide rather than the mere straightforward crime of shooting a judge. But then came a response, the voice somehow softer yet more intent than before. "Tell me more about your time as ambassador. It must have been challenging to maintain appearances after your species decided on this course of action." Izir's antennae twitched in surprise. Most beings recoiled at the mention of his crimes, yet this prisoner seemed almost clinically interested. The question was perceptive, too, cutting straight to what had indeed been the most difficult aspect of his role.
"Challenging is a profound understatement,"
Izir replied, settling back against the cold wall.
"Imagine attending council sessions, debating trade policies and migration quotas, all while knowing your civilization was secretly planning an extinction event."
He closed his eyes, the memories flooding back with uncomfortable clarity.
Our king and military command were focused on the weapons development, the tactical planning, but I was the one who had to look representatives of 100 species in their eyes, or whatever sensory organs they possessed, and maintain the lie.
The diplomatic functions, the formal dinners, the endless negotiations, all of it had become a theater of deception. Every conversation a minefield of potential slips, every relationship tainted by what he knew was coming.
"There was a Haraxian diplomat,"
Izir continued,
"who specialized in cultural exchange programs for emerging civilizations. She was constantly pestering me about expanding our efforts to identify new sentient species worthy of council contact. Her happy gaze was excruciating."
"Did you ever consider warning someone?" his cellmate asked. Izir laughed bitterly.
"Of course, especially after I saw the detailed plans, but betraying my species is treason, punishable by—"
"Death?" interrupted the voice from the next cell.
"Worse,"
Izir replied.
"Complete memory extraction. They would have preserved my body while downloading every neural connection into a matrix of analysis. Their emptied shell would then be maintained on life support as a warning. Not death. Nothingness."
"So fear kept you loyal," the prisoner observed. There was no judgment in his tone, just a flat statement of fact.
"Fear, yes, but also—"
Izir hesitated, realizing he'd never articulated this, even to himself.
"Also conviction. I truly believed, that our actions were justified. The preliminary data showed humans advancing fast. Their capacity for violence against their own kind suggested what they might do to others, and their resource consumption patterns indicated they would never be satisfied with their single world."
Izir's antennae dropped as he recalled his own arrogance.
"I convinced myself we were being prudent, preemptive, that we're protecting not just ourselves but potentially the entire galactic community from a destabilizing force."
"Were you the only one who knew among the ambassadors?" The question came quickly, almost too quickly, as if his neighbor had prepared it in advance.
"Yes, the operation was classified at the highest level. Only the king, the military high command, and I were fully briefed. The weapons scientists knew they were developing planetary-scale weaponry, but most believed it was for defensive purposes."
Izir paused.
"Though I suspect many guessed the truth. Mogarians were not fools."
"And the weapon itself?" prompted his neighbor after a moment of silence. What was it designed to do, exactly? The question struck Izir as odd. Most would have asked why, not how, but he continued nonetheless, finding a strange relief in finally speaking the unvarnished truth.
It was a magnificent and terrible creation, a biological targeting device that could selectively alter matter at the molecular level. It could be calibrated to target specific biological markers or deployed as a general weapon.
His voice took on a detached, academic quality as he described the technology.
The strategic advantage was that it didn't leave radiation behind. A single deployment could never be tracked from distant locations.
How terrifying, remarked this prisoner. He shook his head in agreement, even though the gesture wouldn't be conveyed.
We even considered ourselves ethical in our approach to genocide.
So what happened? I'm guessing there were complications, since you're here and humans still exist. Izir began to pace his small cell, 5 steps one way, 5 steps back, his agitation making stillness impossible.
The Council had surveillance protocols for all member systems, but they were oriented towards external threats, not monitoring members themselves. We managed to shield our weapons development from detection, but deploying them required careful timing.
He stopped pacing and pressed closer to the shared wall.
Our scientists insisted on a limited test strike before full deployment. They argued it was necessary to calibrate the weapons properly, to ensure max effectiveness when we proceed to planet-wide saturation.
And that's when everything went wrong? His neighbor suggested.
No,
Izir corrected him.
That's when everything appeared to go perfectly right. The test was flawlessly executed. We selected 5 medium-sized population centers on a single continent. The strike occurred during their night cycle. We had calculated it would minimize immediate awareness and response, giving us time to collect more data.
Izir's voice grew distant as he recalled watching the live feed from the cloaked observation satellites.
Within a moment, 5 cities ceased to exist as functioning entities. The organic component, the humans and animals, was simply gone, reduced to their base elements. Most buildings remained standing. Power systems continued to function briefly before failing due to lack of operators. It was clinically perfect.
I imagine the humans who weren't in those cities noticed something was amiss, his cellmate observed, his voice carefully neutral.
Eventually, yes, but their communication systems were primitive and fragmented. Global awareness took weeks since they took their time, blaming themselves for the incident. By then, our technical teams were already analyzing the data, preparing for the main deployment.
But you never launched it, the voice prompted.
No, and that,
Izir said, his voice hardening with regret,
was our fatal mistake. The king and his advisors became obsessed with ensuring the council wouldn't detect our actions. Resources that should have been directed toward immediate follow-up strikes were instead diverted to developing more sophisticated cloaking techniques to hide our operations.
He slammed a fist against the wall in sudden frustration.
We were so concerned with the council discovering what we had done that we forgot the threat of what the humans might do. We feared the laws of the civilized galaxy more than the vengeance of a supposedly primitive species.
How long did it take the humans to understand what had happened? The question came softly, almost hesitantly.
Longer than you might expect. Their first assumption was that they had been attacked by other humans. Their history was rife with self-destructive conflicts, but there was no radiation, no chemical residue consistent with their known weapons. Eventually, their scientists determined the attack could have only come from beyond their world.
Izir felt a chill as he recounted what came next.
But understanding that they had been attacked from space and identifying the attackers are very different matters. We thought we were secure. Our planet was 22 light-years from Earth. Their technology could barely reach their own moon. We believed we had decades, if not centuries, before they could possibly pose a threat, if they survived at all, which was never our intention.
Something changed your timeline, observed his neighbor.
Everything changed,
Izir corrected.
While we improved our camouflage, the humans...
He trailed off, the memory still difficult to process despite the years that had passed. The humans what?
They transformed,
Izir whispered.
There had been divisions among them before, nations, ideologies, religions that kept them fragmented and fighting amongst themselves. But our attack...
He struggled to find the words.
Our attack burned away those divisions as efficiently as our weapons had burned away their cities.
His neighbor remained silent, letting him continue at his own pace.
We monitored them, of course. We observed their response, their mounting rituals, their investigations. We recorded their leaders making impassioned speeches about standing united against an unknown enemy from the stars, but we dismissed it as primitive posturing, words without substance.
Izir's voice took on a hollow quality.
We grossly underestimated what humans could accomplish when unified by existential threat and burning hatred. Their greatest minds were gathered in underground facilities, working with minimal sleep, testing and developing technologies at a pace that defied all our predictive models.
You sound almost admiring, the prisoner remarked.
I am,
Izir admitted.
Even now, I cannot help but acknowledge the brilliance of what they achieved, however terrible its purpose. In the time it would take most species to develop a consensus response plan, humans had already moved from theoretical physics to applied technology. They were driven by something our species couldn't comprehend, a mixture of fear, rage, and absolute determination that overrode normal limitations.
He paused, collecting his thoughts.
Our first real hint that we had miscalculated came 3 standard cycles after our test strike, when our long-range communications arrays detected an anomaly. The humans had somehow developed primitive faster-than-light communication capability, not transportation. They couldn't yet move physical objects beyond light speed, but information could now travel instantaneously across the gulf between stars.
That must have been concerning, his cellmate noted with what sounded strangely like suppressed pride.
It should have terrified us, but again we underreacted. Our scientists were impressed, but pointed out that communication alone couldn't harm us. They insisted that developing actual, faster-than-light travel would take the humans decades more, at minimum.
Izir's antennae dropped low against his skull.
What we failed to appreciate was that faster-than-light communication allowed the humans to gather information about the wider galaxy. Somehow, and to this day I don't know exactly how, they pieced together enough to understand the existence of the Council, its basic power structures, and most crucially, its laws regarding unprovoked aggression against pre-contact species.
They contacted the Council directly? His neighbor stated rather than asked.
Yes. Imagine the shock when a species no one had officially discovered suddenly transmitted a formal petition for justice, complete with evidence of the attack and precise accusations against my world. It was...
Izir searched for the appropriate term.
Unprecedented.
How did the Council respond?
With bureaucratic confusion at first,
Izir said with a short, bitter laugh.
The legal framework simply didn't account for a pre-contact species self-reporting their victimization. There were procedures for council members attacking non-members, yes, but the non-members weren't supposed to know about the council in the first place.
He shook his head at the absurdity of it all.
While the council debated jurisdiction and procedure, I was frantically trying to contain the diplomatic damage. I denied everything, of course, claimed the humans were mistaken or delusional, suggested perhaps another unknown species was responsible. But the evidence was hard to deny, and several council races deployed investigative teams to Earth immediately.
They found proof, his neighbor stated.
Irrefutable proof. Traces of our weapons technology, unique to our engineering approach. The investigative report was devastating. Not just confirming our guilt, but detailing the methodical planning that had gone into the attack.
Azir sank down onto his sleeping platform, the weight of memory pressing on him physically.
I was immediately detained, along with any Mogarian officials who could be located off-world, but most of our leadership remained on our homeworld, protecting our planetary defense systems, still believing we could weather the diplomatic storm.
They refused to surrender?
The king issued a statement acknowledging the regrettable incident, but framed it as a necessary security action against a potential destabilizing new species. He briefly offered reparations while refusing to accept criminal liability.
Azir's laugh was hollow.
But even that offer was rescinded when the masses took to the streets. Refusing to pay the taxes required for the reparations, they called for war, arguing they had already paid for the development of the weapons.
And the humans? There was an edge to his neighbor's voice now, barely controlled intensity that Azir failed to notice in his absorption with the story.
The council offered them immediate protected status and accelerated membership, standard procedure for a species that has been victimized by illegal aggression. But the humans...
Azir's voice faltered.
The humans refused.
Refused council protection? His cellmate sounded genuinely surprised.
Refused everything. Membership, protection, even the offer to establish an official peacekeeping presence in their system. They thanked the investigators, then asked them to leave Earth space while they considered their options.
Azir rose again, resuming his agitated pacing.
The council was baffled. Some representatives argued the humans were simply in shock. Others suggested their primitive diplomatic structures couldn't process the complexity of council membership. A few more insightful voices warned that the humans were planning something that would violate council laws, and therefore didn't want to be bound by them.
Those insightful few were right, I'm guessing, his neighbor prompted.
Completely right. 4 standard cycles after their first contact with the council, just as my trial was concluding, the humans did the unthinkable.
Azir stopped pacing, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper.
What followed was not war as most species understand it. There was no declaration, no demand for surrender, no strategic campaign targeting military assets.
He pressed his hand against the wall, as if seeking support.
One moment, life on my homeworld was proceeding with tense normality. The next, our capital city and the king, and the entire central government, simply ceased to exist. And faster-than-light missile, a technology no other species had even considered developing, materialized in the heart of our most protected space and detonated in a flash.
Just one missile? His cellmate asked, voice carefully controlled.
The first one, yes. But unlike our cautious test strikes on Earth, the humans didn't pause to analyze results. They didn't hesitate. Moments later, similar weapons appeared simultaneously above every major population city on our world. Then our space stations, then our colonies.
Azir's voice cracked.
Within 1 standard hour, civilization on all Mogarian-controlled worlds had been effectively extinguished.
He laughed then, a sound with no humor in it.
You know what's truly grotesque? Humans already understood how to make devastatingly effective bombs before our attack. They had nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons centuries earlier. Our strike didn't teach them destructive capability. It merely gave them a focus for improving what they already had mastered.
You survived, his neighbor observed quietly.
Only because I was off-world, detained by council security pending the outcome of my trial. A few hundred Mogarians survived the same way. Diplomats, traders, travelers who happened to be on other worlds when the attack came.
Azir slumped against the wall, suddenly exhausted by the telling.
During my sentencing, they brought footage from my homeworld. Cities reduced to craters, forests burning, oceans boiling where particularly large population centers had been targeted.
The memory still had the power to shock him, even after all of this.
You know what humans considered significant enough to highlight in my trial? Among all the planetary devastation, the fact that their first test bomb, the one my species had developed years earlier on Earth, had directly hit something called an animal shelter, a place where they kept other species for care and protection.
He laughed again, the same hollow sound.
5 cities rid of life, and they focused on the animal shelter at the epicenter of our device, as if that somehow made our crime more heinous.
Perhaps to them it did, the neighbor suggested mildly.
Perhaps,
Azir conceded.
Their value structures were, alien to us, which is exactly why we should have exterminated them completely when we had the chance.
Silence fell between the cells. Azir wondered if he'd finally said something shocking enough to disturb his seemingly unflappable neighbor. But then the voice returned, steady and curious. So you still believe your species was right to attack Earth, even knowing the outcome? Azir considered the question carefully.
Right in assessment, wrong in execution,
he finally said.
Everything that happened afterward proved humans were exactly the threat we feared, capable of extraordinary technological leaps, willing to annihilate an entire civilization in retribution, and utterly ruthless in their pursuit of vengeance.
He tilted his head back, looking up at the featureless ceiling of his cell.
Our mistake wasn't targeting humans. Our mistake was giving them time to respond. We should have committed fully, immediately. A single overwhelming strike that left nothing alive on their world.
His voice hardened with bitter conviction.
Better to face the fury and laws of the Council than the vengeance of humanity.
Silence stretched between the cells. Azir had expected his neighbor to recoil at his final statement, the open admission that he still believed in the attempted genocide of an entire species. Instead, the voice, when it finally came, was thoughtful, almost philosophical. Tell me more about what happened after, not just to your species, but to the humans. Azir's antennae twitched with mild surprise.
You're not like most prisoners I've encountered. Most can't stomach hearing about planetary-scale death.
I've seen my share of ugliness, the voice replied simply, and I want to understand how it all ended. Azir settled back, finding an odd comfort in continuing his story.
After the human counterattack, the Council faced an unprecedented situation. A non-member species had virtually exterminating a founding member civilization, an act that, under normal circumstances, would have resulted in severe sanctions, possibly even a unified military response.
He gave a bitter laugh.
But these were hardly normal circumstances. The evidence of our unprovoked attack was irrefutable. Many council representatives were secretly terrified of humanity's demonstrated capabilities, and a disturbing number seemed to think we had received appropriate justice.
How did they justify that position? His cellmate asked.
They invoked the proportional response doctrine, an obscure subsection of interspecies law that had never been applied on such a scale before. It argues that victims of aggression have an inherent right to prevent future attacks through decisive action.
Azir's voice took on the formal cadence of legal quotation.
When diplomatic remedies have been exhausted or are unavailable, the targeted party may employ force sufficient to neutralize the demonstrated threat.
His neighbor made a soft sound that might have been amusement. Convenient interpretation.
Extremely, especially since humans had made no attempt at diplomatic remedies, but the Council was eager to avoid confrontation with this newly revealed technological power. So when humanity finally agreed to open formal relations 3 cycles later, the Council practically tipped over itself to be accommodating.
Humans joined the Council. The question came with a note of genuine curiosity.
Eventually, yes. After establishing diplomatic outposts in several key systems and demonstrating their commitment to Council principles moving forward, with an exemption for their actions against us, of course.
Izzy couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice.
Their integration was remarkably smooth. Humans proved to be skilled diplomats when they chose to be. Their representatives spoke eloquently about their desire for peaceful coexistence, their regret for the unfortunate necessity of their response to our attack, and their commitment to sharing certain technological advancements as a gesture of goodwill.
What technologies did they share? His neighbor asked.
Medical, primarily. Nothing with military applications. They developed remarkable effective treatments for a range of conditions affecting Council species. Their singular focus on our destruction had given them insights into molecular biology that yielded beneficial applications once repurposed.
Izzy's antennae drooped.
Even in that, they found a way to present themselves as benefactors rather than exterminators.
You sound almost admiring again, his cellmate observed.
I can acknowledge their effectiveness while hating what they represent,
Izzy replied sharply. Then his voice softened.
But yes, there is a certain terrible magnificence in how thoroughly they transformed from victims to powers in such a short time. No other species in Council record has ever managed such a transition.
His neighbor was silent for a moment, then asked, "What about the surviving Mogarians? What happened to them?" Izzy's body tensed. This was the part of the story he rarely shared, the aftermath that continued even now.
Officially, we were granted protected status as an endangered species. The Council established conservation programs, cultural heritage archives, even a genetic repository in case we ever wished to attempt re-establishing our population.
But unofficially, the voice prompted?
Unofficially, many of us died anyway.
Izzy's voice dropped to a near whisper.
Strange accidents, mysterious ailments, unexplained disappearances, always with plausible deniability, always with insufficient evidence to raise formal complaints.
He pressed closer to the wall.
At first, we thought it was various Council species acting on lingering prejudice, but eventually we discovered the truth. It was humans, individual humans acting without official sanction from their government. They had developed a network dedicated to hunting down every last Mogarian, regardless of personal involvement in the attack on Earth.
Vigilante justice, his neighbor suggested.
A crusade,
Izzy corrected.
Driven by something deeper than justice. Their leaders might have accepted the proportional response doctrine, might have been satisfied with the destruction of our civilization, but some humans—
He struggled to find the words.
They carried the wounds differently. The animal shelter,
he added with a bitter laugh.
Always back to the damned animal shelter. Do you know what's worst?
Izzy continued, not waiting for a response.
The randomness of survival. I helped plan the extinction of their species, yet here I sit, alive, while many others who had no say in the decision are dead. all reduced to ash because of a decision made by a handful of leaders. The cosmic justice of it is."
He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. For several minutes, neither prisoner spoke. Izir found himself drained by the telling, by reliving the horrific sequence of events that had led to this cell. Finally, his neighbor broke the silence. "You've lived through something few beings ever experience, the near total destruction of your kind. What would you say is the lesson others should take from your story?" Izir didn't hesitate.
"That's simple. If you discover humans and they're anywhere near your territory, you have exactly two options. Establish peaceful contact immediately, or eliminate them completely in a single strike. There is no middle ground, no test attacks, no gradual approach."
He leaned against the wall separating them, lowering his voice as if sharing a profound secret.
"Whatever species you are, whatever your own capabilities might be, heed this warning. In victory or in defeat, you only go to war with humans once."
His cellmate laughed, a sound with genuine warmth that surprised Izir. "I appreciate that advice, but it doesn't really apply to me."
"No?"
Izir asked, curious.
"Why not?"
"Two reasons," the voice replied. "First, I'm going to be in this prison for the remainder of my days, so I'm not likely to be making first contact with anyone."
"And the second reason?"
Izir prompted when his neighbor didn't continue. "You'll see for yourself in about an hour, when they let us out for the meal period." There was something in the tone, a subtle shift that sent an inexplicable chill down Izir's spine. For the next hour, Izir found himself both anxious and curious about his mysterious cellmate. The conversation had flowed so naturally he'd almost forgotten the strange circumstances, sharing his darkest secrets with someone whose species and appearance remained completely unknown to him. He revealed more to this stranger than to his own defense counsel during his trial. When the distinctive tone signaling meal period finally sounded, Izir felt an almost childish excitement. After cycles of isolation, he would not only have company during the meal, but would finally see the being he'd been conversing with. The cell doors slid open simultaneously throughout the block. Izir stepped out, turning immediately toward the adjacent cell, his eyes widening in anticipation. Then he froze. Standing before him was unmistakably a human, male by their binary classification system, average height, muscular build, with the characteristic absence of any visible non-mammalian features, the pink-beige skin tone, the external ears, the hair-covered scalp, all the distinctive markers of the species that had destroyed his civilization. Izir felt his respiratory system constrict in shock. All this time, he had been confessing his crimes, boasting of them, even to one of the very beings whose extermination he had helped plan. The human took a step toward him, and Izir instinctively backed away until his shoulders hit the far wall. There was nowhere to run in the narrow corridor. "My family was there, you know, in the place your bomb exploded." Taking one more step, he continued. "And the judge I shot?" the human said conversationally, as if continuing their earlier discussion, "was the one who argued against giving you a life sentence. He thought 50 cycles was sufficient punishment." A smile spread across the human's face, devoid of warmth. "I disagree." He moved closer to Izir, who remained frozen in place, until they were separated by mere centimeters. Then the human leaned in, his mouth close to where Izir's auditory organs were located, and whispered, "See you in the shower later."